This is Still Mormon, the show dedicated to unsettling Mormon history.
Welcome back to Still Mormon. I'm Jeremy, your host. And today, I've been eagerly anticipating this episode because Michelle Stone, Whitney Horning and I, we were invited to speak at Sunstone recently. And we were allowed to give two presentations, one on Heber Kimball and the second on 6 early Mormon polygamy documents. And it was a really astounding experience. It was very well received. And I personally want to thank the organizers, Lindsay Hansen Park in particular, and Scott Barrett, for, frankly, for their magnanimity, for allowing us to be there. We know that people disagree with us, and that this can be such a sensitive topic. And so we're not surprised by that at all. But boy, we were surprised by the welcome that we received. And we're very grateful that the organizers were willing to have us there and to have that open conversation. And it went extremely well. And Michelle, Whitney, and I wanted to share our presentations with the Still Mormon audience. And so today, we're going to be giving to you the very first presentation on Heber C. Kimball, called Heber C. Kimball, The Cause I Have Embraced. Today's episode, it is extremely helpful context for what I gave last time about the Sarah Crooks letter, as well as what I presented in episode 8 on the companion revelation and William Clayton and his Manchester diary. If you haven't seen that, go back and watch that episode. If you haven't seen the Sarah Crooks letter presentation, go back and watch that, because this material will make a lot more sense when you have that background. And in today's presentation, we're going to give you a lot more of the picture of what was happening in England. Heber Kimball is a really big puzzle piece to the whole of the polygamy narrative, but especially to this England timeframe. And this is really the first time that I think that I've really dived in to Heber Kimball. And so today we're going to give you a lot more background. By the way, we pack a lot of information in today's presentation, but it really is an overview of what was happening concerning Heber Kimball. And I will be also completing the picture that I began to draw in last episode about Sarah Crooks. We're going to be talking about how to interpret that letter. I'm going to give you the full context. Part of that's starting today, and part of that's coming in a subsequent episode. The full context of what was happening, the evidence, the related evidence. And there's a ton of it in England related to Sarah Crooks and her letter. We're going to be talking about Heber Kimball, Brigham Young, William Clayton, Willard Richards, and others, and a bunch of other activity that was going on. And I think once you see that material, you're going to have a light bulb moment that what we should have had in terms of evidence, in terms of Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, in the contemporaneous record, we actually have in England. So today, Heber Kimball, The Cause I Have Embraced. Michelle is going to go first. She could not be here. Unfortunately, we really missed her, but she graciously allowed us to use the audio from the live presentation. And then Whitney on today's show is going to present her material. Then I will present mine. And then Whitney and I will have a robust discussion. It was an incredible discussion about what we presented, providing more context and understanding about Heber Kimball. And I think between the presentations and the discussion, you're going to learn a ton about this period and about this former Mormon apostle. You're going to love it. So here it is, our Sunstone presentation, and here's Michelle.
Thank you. We are all very happy to be here. I can say that we had a difficult time choosing which topics. So hopefully we have chosen relevant topics that will be insightful, but please know these are not this is not a comprehensive version of the work that we have done. This is just a snippet to give a taste of some of the work that is happening in some of our perspectives. And so I want to start with a methodological question for all of us to consider. I want to ask, what kinds of evidence might historians realistically expect to see from a secret and illegal 19th century religious marital practice? Should we reasonably expect to see letters, journal entries, maybe children, or is that unreasonable? It is well understood that that clear contemporaneous evidence of Joseph Smith's polygamy is extremely scant. The vast majority of sources come from antagonistic accusations like John C. Bennett and the Nauvoo Expositor, or decades-late motivated accounts such as Joseph F. Smith's 1869 affidavits or the 1892 Temple Lot depositions. The very few exceptions, such as the 1842 Whitney letter and the Clayton diaries, are heavily subject to interpretation, and actually work is forthcoming on each of those documents right now as we speak. The scarcity of actual evidence of Joseph Smith's polygamy is usually justified by the fact that polygamy was illegal and secretive, and thus we are told what we see from Joseph Smith is about what we should expect to see. If this is a methodologically sound explanation, it should establish the evidentiary expectation not only for Joseph Smith's polygamy, but for Nauvoo polygamy in general. This panel will present Heber C. Kimball as a test case to consider against this explanation. While Joseph Smith's involvement in polygamy has been hotly contested since Nauvoo and even before, nobody I know questions whether Heber C. Kimball engaged in secret Nauvoo polygamy, and for many very good reasons. We will share some of the documentary record of Heber C. Kimball's polygamy in order to demonstrate the kinds of evidence secret polygamy tends to leave behind. Heber and Violet Kimball were baptized into the church together with their longtime close friends, Brigham and Miriam Young. 3 years later, Brigham and Heber became apostles on the same day. Brigham had seniority because he was 2 weeks older. Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young would go on to become the most zealous and prolific polygamists in American history. Brigham Young is estimated to have had 56 wives and 57 children. Heber is estimated to have had 43 wives and 65 children. As far as I have seen, they held the record until they were overtaken by Rulon and Warren Jeffs. The earliest evidence I have seen regarding Heber C. Kimball's commitment to polygamy is a revelation he recorded during the difficult period when Joseph and Hiram were in Liberty Jail and the saints were being chased out of Missouri. Heber recorded that one evening I felt very sorrowful and lonely. The following words came to me. And the Spirit said unto me, write, which I did by taking a piece of paper and writing on my knee as follows. Far West, April 6, 1839. A word from the Spirit of the Lord to my servant Heber C. Kimball. Verily I say unto my servant Heber, thou art my son, in whom I am well pleased. Thy name is written in heaven, no more to be blotted out forever. It goes on to say, and my spirit and blessing shall rest down upon thy posterity forever and forever, and they shall be called after thy name, for thou shalt have many more sons and daughters. For thy seed shall be numerous as the sands upon the seashore. It also says, trouble not thyself about thy family, for they are in my hands. I will feed them and I will clothe them. Heber returned to his family on May 2nd, 1839, and recorded, in reading the words of inspiration which I had written, my wife bore record to the truth of that part which said, trouble not thyself about thy family, etc. In relation to that part which said, I should have many more sons and daughters, she rather doubted that, as she considered she was too advanced in years, and the thought had never entered her head or mine that the Lord would establish in his church the doctrine of plurality of wives in my day in the flesh. Someone, possibly Helen Mar Kimball Whitney, based on how she reported it in her published histories, she crossed out the in the flesh and added, still I believed it would be restored to the earth at some future time. Helen also reported, quote, my father was often called a prophet, and years ago in Nauvoo, I heard him predict that it would yet become a law of this nation that men should marry a plurality of wives. Brigham himself stated that Heber was his prophet, and this prophecy that polygamy would become the law of America showed up in Brigham's August 1852 address when he first presented what would become Section 132. Helen also wrote, quote, before my father ever heard that such a principle had been revealed to Joseph Smith, he said to some friends in my hearing that if all things were to be restored again as they were in the beginning, as the scriptures declare them, the principle of plurality of wives must also be restored. And he was heard to repeat the same when he was on his second mission to Europe. This was his mission from 1839 to 1841 that Whitney and Jeremy will address further. Heber later claimed that Joseph Smith first taught him polygamy in 1841, yet multiple sources verify before 1839, he believed polygamy needed to be restored. He interpreted his 1839 revelation to mean it would be in his day, and he repeatedly testified of the restoration of polygamy, both before and during his 1839 mission to England. It is worth noting that several of the ideas from Heber's 1839 revelation and teachings showed up in later polygamy revelations, including both the descriptions in the Nauvoo Expositor and 132 itself. For example, the promise of assured salvation, also interpreting Abraham's innumerable seed as literal biological children, and the idea supported by a very poor reading of Isaiah 4:1 that men didn't need to provide for their families. The specific terms Heber used are also telling. Plurality of wives, the term Heber consistently used, was the same wording that the Nauvoo Expositor used to describe the heresies being taught in the church. The terms plural marriage and celestial marriage would not be developed until decades later in Utah. Even more telling, Heber repeatedly referred to polygamy as both a principle and a doctrine, which is exactly what it is called in verse 1 of 132, the principle and doctrine of having many wives and concubines. Brigham Young also claimed that Joseph Smith first taught him polygamy in 1841. Brigham Young, who also claimed that Joseph Smith first taught him in polygamy in 1841, also confirmed that he gained a testimony of polygamy while he was in England with Heber, completely independent of Joseph Smith. He said, "I knew of the doctrine of polygamy by revelation to myself while in England before it was taught to me by Joseph." Personally, I find this list of questions to ask Brother Joseph that Brigham wrote upside down on the back flyleaf of his England mission journal very interesting. It includes, was David a man after God's own heart? I'll also quickly point out that Brigham's first cousin, Willard Richards, was also with them in England. He became church historian after his return from England and was another early adopter of polygamy. After the succession crisis, Brigham chose Heber as his first counselor and Willard as his second counselor in his first presidency. The other main source of Joseph Smith's polygamy was also in England with the elders. Heber had baptized William Clayton in England, and they remained very close. After returning to Nauvoo, Heber and Willard Richards were instrumental in getting Clayton hired as Joseph Smith's scribe. The majority of claims and information about Joseph Smith's involvement in polygamy came through these four men: Brigham Young, his best friend and personal prophet Heber C. Kimball, his cousin and church historian Willard Richards, and the eager scribe William Clayton. Heber's and Brigham's documented commitment to polygamy before any claim that they had heard it from Joseph Smith complicates their accounts of shock, surprise, sorrow, and deep struggle when Joseph first revealed polygamy to them after their return from England. For example, in an 1866 sermon, Heber described receiving a, quote, "Thus saith the Lord" revelation from Joseph Smith, quote, in the presence of Brigham Young and Willard Richards. He continued, "I am going to tell it right out, as people do not believe that polygamy started with the prophet Joseph Smith. It was thus saith the Lord for my servant Heber and Brigham and Willard and Brigham and Heber to take more wives, for this is pleasing in my God's sight. And now they say we established polygamy. And when we came home in 1841, we had not been home over 6 days before Joseph called us together and laid these things before us. The first time we knew of them," is what Heber claimed in 1866. I will also mention that while we have dozens of sources documenting Emma's, Joseph's, and Hiram's resolute efforts to put down, reject, and root out polygamy, we have nothing like that from Heber or Brigham. Instead, we have talks where Brigham seems to be subtly conditioning the people towards spiritual wifery. For example, on April 8, 1844, just months before the martyrdom, Hiram delivered a fiery anti-spiritual wifery speech where he declared unequivocally, "I wish the elders of Israel to understand it is lawful for a man to marry a wife, but it is unlawful to have more, and God has not commanded anyone to have more." Brigham Young spoke after Hiram and employed subtle rhetorical rehabilitation of the term spiritual wife. He said, "I want a wife that can take care of my children when I am away, who can pray, lay on hands, anoint with oil, and baffle the enemy. And this is a spiritual wife." This pattern continued after the martyrdom. On April 6, 1845, Brigham referred to what he called Joseph's spiritual wife system in positive terms to a large Nauvoo audience. He said, "I tell you the truth as it is in the bosom of eternity. A man cannot be saved without a woman by his side. This is spiritual wifism. That is the doctrine of spiritual wives." Heber and Brigham's let's see, there was one more thing I was going to say. It is also important to note that most of the accounts we have of Nauvoo polygamy have far more to say about Brigham and especially Heber than they do about Joseph Smith. Just a few examples are John Bennett's publication of the Martha Brotherton account, as well as Helen Mar Kimball's histories and Catherine Lewis's expose. Catherine Lewis lived with Heber for several months in late 1845 and gave a detailed account of his recruitment tactics, which she was subjected to. Again, we don't have clear documentation like that about Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith is often tacked on to the accounts referring mainly to Heber C. Kimball and Brigham Young. So Heber's and Brigham's polygamy was very small and secretive while Joseph was alive. Heber had just one documented plural wife, but he still managed to father a child, which Joseph never managed to do despite having allegedly dozens of wives. Yet within 18 months after the martyrdom, Heber had married 35 wives and around 7 more children, with around 7 more children born while still in Nauvoo, where polygamy remained illegal and persecution had intensified. That leaves some of us to ask whether the real barrier to open polygamy or more abundant polygamy was actually the laws in Nauvoo, or if it was Joseph Smith and Hiram Smith's fight against polygamy. So I hope this the document shared in this panel can help people understand why some of us do not agree that polygamy's secret and illegal nature can adequately or convincingly explain the lack of evidence of Joseph Smith's involvement. In my view, the documentary footprint surrounding Heber C. Kimball provides a far better model for what the development and implementation of secret illegal polygamy actually looks like. The abundant and very clear pre-martyrdom evidence for Heber's polygamy makes it far more difficult to justify the lack of evidence for Joseph's polygamy. If anything like the evidence presented in this panel existed for Joseph Smith, there would be no controversy or debate. I would argue that we cannot claim to have a clear understanding of the origins of Nauvoo polygamy, while the documentary record of Heber's and Brigham's pre-martyrdom polygamy has received so little scholarly attention. Thank you.
It is estimated that by the end of his life, Heber C. Kimball had married approximately 43 women. It is irrefutable that he was a prolific polygamist. The intriguing question might not be how many wives Heber acquired, but rather, when did he first begin thinking about plural wives, and what do his correspondence and journals reveal about that process? An examination of the letters between Heber and Violet during his first mission to England from 1837 to 1838 reflects the concerns and affections of a typical husband-wife relationship. Thoughts of home. Quote, "Tell me how you get along, how your health is, and how you enjoy your mind. Tell me how the children get along. This morning I sit down to write a few lines to you, and may the Lord assist me, that I may write a few lines that may be interesting to you, my dear friend, knowing that you have great anxiety for my welfare, how that I get along in the ministry. Now let your heart rejoice, for the Lord is with me both night and day, teaching me things of the kingdom both in dreams and in visions. Your kind letter came to hand, which made my heart to rejoice to hear from you and the children that you are enjoying good health." He expressed concerns regarding their farm. Quote, "Tell me how the crops grow." He shared with Violet his experiences of travel and missionary work. "This morning we are engaged in buying our provisions to take board of the ship tomorrow. The work had just commenced in this place, and many believed our testimony. The priests are afraid of us and do not come out against us openly, but cry false prophets and false teachers. A large congregation got together to hear me preach." Historians generally believe that Heber's introduction to plural marriage came through Joseph Smith. However, Heber's letters, journals, and later recollections point toward a more complicated story. Between 1839 and 1841, before plural marriage was publicly acknowledged, the cause Heber came to embrace seemed to have been in a formative stage. During this time, Heber appears to have been in a transition from a conventional monogamist to an early participant in the practice of spiritual wifery. In September 1839, Heber C. Kimball left Nauvoo on his way to England for his second mission to that country. He stopped over in New York for a couple of months, earning money and converts before he sailed for Liverpool in December. While in England for this second mission, the social environment Heber was involved with included unusually intimate relationships with women who were not his wife, one of whom was Ellen Balfour Redman. Ellen was one of Heber's New England converts. She was a well-educated Scottish woman who brought her children with her as she followed the apostles to England. The significance of Ellen Balfour Redman is not that she later became a known plural wife of Heber's. Rather, her presence allows us to observe the social world Heber occupied as he was beginning to explore the law that leads to the celestial world. When she arrived in England, Ellen spent a fortnight trying to find Wilford Woodruff and Heber C. Kimball, eventually locating them through a dream. Ellen immediately began serving as a companion and secretary to Woodruff and Kimball and became a central figure in these men's journals and letters over the next few months. 3 days after locating the mission companions, Ellen wrote to Heber's wife Violet in intimate covenantal language. Quote, "It is true that I am a stranger to you in the flesh. Still, we are sisters in the bonds of the everlasting covenant. I do not know how long the Lord will require me to stay here, neither do I know in what way he designs to make use of me. But this I do know, that having made a covenant with the Lord by sacrifice, I am willing to be everything and anything according to his will." Dr. William Copeland and his wife Susan were also prominent characters in Heber's mission letters and journal, and may have contributed to the circumstances in which Heber's understanding of the cause evolved. They spent a lot of time with Heber and Wilford. On one occasion, according to Wilford, as he and Heber walked home from Wilford's portrait sitting, they met up with the Copelands. Heber and Susan became lost in the crowd, and he and Dr. Copeland eventually found them in Covent Garden. Heber's account differs slightly. His journal entry states, quote, "In the evening we went with Dr. Copeland and his wife to a place called Covent Garden. Spent the evening, Sister Copeland and myself got lost. The doctor and Elder W got lost from each other. We all come together again providentially." A week later, Susan Copeland went with Heber as he sat for his own portrait, and then accompanied him for a few hours as he visited at the house of the San Giovannis. Heber's second mission journal contains a large amount of material devoted to companionships, both men and women, excursions mixed in with missionary service. These records during this period were filled with women's names, often asking Violet to, quote, "give my love to," quote, whichever woman he had inquired about or mentioned in that letter. One common theme is seen in his January 20th and 21st, 1841 journal entries. Heber noted that Sister Mary Connor spent the evening with him, during which time she combed and cut his hair. The next day, Ellen visited Heber's apartment. He wrote, "Sister Ellen come in the evening. She finished the letter to my wife. She stayed with me through the evening. Elder W went and preached after meeting the doctor and his wife, and others come in to see me. Sister Ellen combed my head. We washed our feet and went to bed." A few weeks after Ellen joined Heber as clerk and companion, he wrote to Violet, "I had rather that God would take me from this world than to be left to bring a wound upon his cause that I have embraced, which I know to be a true system of salvation. I know there is no man that can get it on any other principle than the principles of virtue, which is one of the attributes of the Almighty. And I pray that the Almighty will help you and me to fulfill all points, the law that leads to the celestial world, so that we can sit down in the presence of the Father and the Son and with all the prophets and the apostles and those that has taken the same course that we have to in order to obtain the same glory with them. Dr. Copeland will leave the city in a few weeks. He is a smart man. I have received much instruction from him, and he has taken much pains to show me many things. Now, my dear Violet, a thank you for your caution. I received it as from the Lord. When I come home, a hint is sufficient." The repeated presence of Ellen Redmond, other women, and the Copelands in Heber's records, along with his own reference to having received much instruction, implies that their roles in this period deserve further examination. During Heber's second mission period, patterns begin to emerge that can be characterized as secrecy, coded language, new theological ideas tied to exaltation, and evolving intimacy with women. The evidence recorded in Heber's dreams, visions, and conversations suggests that his understanding of the law that leads to the celestial world was still developing as he attempted to reconcile this belief and negotiate it within his own marriage. By early 1841, his commitment to this belief dramatically altered both the language he used with Violet and the way he interacted with women during his second English mission. Together, these changes suggest that Heber was moving from private exploration toward active implementation of a principle he believed was necessary for his exaltation. After Heber accepted the doctrine of spiritual wifery, the tone of his letters to Violet shifted. The language he began to employ seemed to have a new purpose: to persuade Violet to embrace his new theology, and it bears little resemblance to his earlier missionary correspondence. He praised her faithfulness. "I do not want anyone to know of what I have told you in my bosom, for you are proven and tested, for you have been through the fire." He assured her of his love for her. "We are one. I know of no ones that are more so than Heber and Violet." He emphasized her unique status. "No one can supersede you." He connected her willingness to support his actions to eternal glory and urged secrecy. "What I have done is according to the mind and will of God, for his glory and mine, so it will be for thine. Every son and daughter that is brought forth by the wives that are given to me will add to your glory, as well as this letter. I wish to seek the kingdom of heaven and its righteousness, for I do want all things added to me here in this world, so that I can be crowned in a fullness of glory in the celestial world. This I know is your feelings, and you do not wish me to come behind in any that will exalt us in this kingdom. I must think. Keep this letter to yourself and all of its contents. Then no one will have feelings, and no one will be any the wiser for it." Heber's language appears intended to persuade Violet that his actions were divinely sanctioned. He believed he was called of God to give life to all those that wished to receive it from him, and that her support would secure eternal rewards. Some of the language and relational patterns in these letters can be interpreted by modern readers as resembling what psychologists today would call love bombing, spiritual manipulation, and coercive persuasion. The record of Heber's second English mission depicts a man actively experimenting with, interpreting, and attempting to implement what he believed was a higher law, rather than one who was quietly wrestling with a doctrine that was already fully formed. His later correspondence with Violet bears little resemblance to the openness of his earlier missionary letters, reflecting an increasing effort to conceal the principle from others. At the same time, later sources, including Helen Mar Kimball's recollections and Heber's funeral discourse for Violet, wherein he stated, "I have taken 40 wives, and many without her knowledge, but she afterwards gave them to me in the temple," make it explicit what is only suggested at in his earlier letters and second mission journal. Taken together, these sources indicate that Heber's path toward plural marriage was gradual and evolving, rather than the adoption of a fully articulated system. I believe that Heber C. Kimball's efforts to understand and implement the spiritual wife doctrine warrant further research and exploration.
Two more episodes deserve mention alongside what's already been shown here. One involves Heber directly, the other close enough to him that it merits notice, and a woman is at the center of both. March 14th, 1841, 23-year-old Manchester Mormon convert Sarah Crooks wrote a desperate letter to Brigham Young, who was then serving as a missionary in nearby Liverpool. She opened directly, "Dear sir, pardon my boldness. My spirit has been wounded beyond measure.
She explained she'd been, quote, keeping company, quote, very constant with one of the Brotherton sons at her apartment in late 1840. Only hinting at what they were doing, she wrote, quote, I will leave you to guess the rest. A belief traceable to Apostle Heber Kimball, who had counseled Sarah privately and repeatedly that if Sarah learned the mind of the Lord, then it was right to give her heart to any man she thought she could love. Acting on Kimball's counsel, Sarah began seeing Brotherton alone at her apartment for about a month. About Christmas, rumors spread through Manchester, and Sarah was much slandered and slighted through evil and false reports, which branded her as unvirtuous. In desperation, she turned to God for deliverance from the scorn. At the moment of her deepest despair, Kimball returned to Manchester and, rather than correcting her, encouraged her to continue her relationship. She took his words as an answer to prayer and hoped her troubles would have an end, but she wrote, it was not so. Word of the scandal spread, and Sarah's mother and sister also turned away from her. And then Brotherton himself suddenly ceased all contact, breaking Sarah's heart. Her friend Rebecca Partington confronted Brotherton directly, demanding to know what made him cut Sarah off. His answer, quote, it was Brother Young that told him something that caused him to leave Sarah. Then Sarah confronted Young, quote, have you so soon forgot what you said in Pratt's upstairs room, that you would defend me and stop even a word that might be spoken against me? By not defending Sarah to Brotherton, Brigham broke the promise he'd made to Sarah in Parley Pratt's bedroom. She begged Brigham, quote, has the Spirit of God given you to see that I was not virtuous? If so, why not tell me of it as a friend, seeing I am friendless? I've looked up to you as being a man of God. She closed asking him to write back. We don't know if he ever did. Just 5 months after Sarah wrote her letter to Young, another man nearby, who may well have known Sarah, began to learn about something else amiss in Manchester. On September 2nd, 1841, Joseph Fielding, former president of the British Mission, wrote a striking entry in his journal describing a scene which historian Don Bradley has labeled, quote, a promiscuous form of spiritual wifery. Fielding had just learned of what he called, quote, the new companion revelation, which was believed in and practiced by a, quote, select little company of Mormons in Manchester and Preston, England, who, quote, looked upon themselves as better than the rest, met together as a choice band where they obtained manifestations which were not lawful to tell the common saints. It was, quote, mostly women, he wrote, who received the dreams and prophesied, and through them it was, quote, shown them who their new companions should be in another world, often entirely outside a person's current marriage. One woman prophesied that, quote, an elder's wife would die and he should be married to another certain person. These prophetesses, as Fielding called them, also would prophesy cursings on fellow saints. One even cursed Fielding himself. Fielding rejected the revelation and took the matter to Apostle Parley Pratt, who agreed it wasn't of God. Though oddly, Fielding noted, a new companion had also been chosen for Pratt, by whom Fielding doesn't say, and he never mentions if anything came of it. Fielding then describes, quote, too great familiarity between Mormon men and women in the area, which worsened once certain elders arrived from America. One unmarried sister was left pregnant, and the elder responsible told her there was no harm in going to bed together, citing to her as precedent an unnamed married elder C, who went to bed with different women, slept often with a sister P, and told those women there was, quote, no harm in doing so. A second married elder, an elder T, was also disciplined for going to bed with women. Fielding closed, exasperated, quote, what do their wives think of such things? Fielding's September 1841 entry is startling but hard to decipher on its own. Yet another record corroborates Fielding's account in remarkable detail and connects us back to our first story. That record, William Clayton's own Manchester diary. Clayton, Fielding's counselor and friend, describes associating constantly in social, not ecclesiastical settings, with a group made up mostly of women, with rarely other men present. Their meetings were often marked by the women airing grievances and intense jealousies, begging the question, what was causing so much jealousy between the women? Fielding's brief mention of women receiving dreams regarding new companions becomes a major storyline in Clayton's diary, which records a series of such dreams, mostly from women, mostly about Clayton's own marriage. Betsy Dewsnup and Margaret Jones both dreamed of Clayton in trouble, his child crying for bread, his wife nowhere in sight. Mary Hardman dreamed of Clayton's wife wandering Manchester in distress, hair undone, searching for Clayton in vain. Catherine Bates dreamed Clayton was, quote, stripped and in the greatest trouble, his wife, quote, dead or near to dying, echoing Fielding's diary. Sarah Crooks dreamed that the American elders were joking with her about Clayton taking a second wife. Sarah had a manifestation of her own. She dreamed someone, quote, brought a young man before her and said he was to be her companion. Kathy Bates then prophesied trouble was coming and Sarah must, quote, keep herself single, leaving Sarah in tears. Clayton also recorded a woman who pronounced a cursing on one Mary Witch and a cursing on Elder Willard Richards, prophesying that he would, quote, not live long. This woman also had a vision wherein she, quote, foresaw all that had taken place concerning Deacon Arthur Smith, a man who recently had married Betsy Holden, because Arthur had had his own vision that told him to marry Betsy, though she was already a married woman. Clayton even recorded his own dream of standing in a garden of ripe fruit, while his wife vanished over a hill, leaving him feeling, quote, like a single or unmarried person. Clayton's account of his friends Thomas and Susan Miller provides the clearest parallel with Fielding's account of the woman who dreamed an elder's wife would die and he would be married to another woman. Clayton records that Susan Miller knew who Thomas's next companion would be if she were to die, but she refused to tell him, enraging him so much he struck her and then begged forgiveness. Thomas Miller would later teach the, quote, two-wife system, taking a second wife and then be excommunicated. The, quote, too great familiarity Fielding alluded to is documented in great detail by Clayton, who spent nearly every day, morning to night, in the company of women who were not his wife, rarely with another man present. He wrote more than double the letters to other women than he does to his wife, who he barely mentions. He records sleeping away from his own lodgings at women's homes more than once. On one occasion, he describes a sister singing in tongues in her sleep for nearly 2 hours until 2 a.m., written in such a way suggesting he may have been present to witness it. He wrote of having, quote, used great liberty towards Alice Hardman. Alice would later become one of his spiritual wives. And at the Millers, amid the tension over Susan's secret, Thomas had taken to, quote, kissing all in the house before bed, a house where Clayton's friends, Sarah Crooks and Rebecca Partington, then lived. Clayton's relationship with Sarah Crooks plays by far the most prominent role in his story. They lived in the same boarding house, shared meals, morning to night for months, and walked together to his many ministerial appointments, drawing visible jealousy from other saints. Their evenings often ran very late after supper, sometimes past 2 a.m, filled with intimate conversation and often alone together upstairs in the bedroom quarters. Periodically, he records an apparent private ritual. On 8 separate occasions, always late at night and alone, Sarah washed his feet. Betsy Poole did so once as well. In his diary, Clayton confessed what was happening to him, his growing temptation, his love for Sarah Crooks, his prayer that God preserve him from impure affections. Yet despite the confession, he persisted in the relationship until he left the area. All of this aligns with striking precision to what Fielding described. Perhaps most telling is what's missing from Clayton's diary. 13 pages from this exact period have heavily penciled redactions in large sections, and every redaction surrounds Clayton's interactions with women. He's with Sarah or Rebecca or others, writing about one or more of them immediately before or after nearly every redaction. And under several of the pencil scribbles, the women's names are still faintly visible. Something specific was deliberately hidden by someone. We just don't know exactly by whom. In 1843, when Clayton describes being granted a long-desired favor by Brigham Young, he immediately begins taking spiritual wives. 8 of the women he pursues in Nauvoo in 1843, including Sarah Crooks, were women he'd known closely from his Manchester mission. Fielding never names his Elder C, the one who, quote, went into bed with different women, slept often with Sister P, and told them, quote, it was no harm to do so. But Clayton's diary portrays a man fitting Fielding's description very closely. The constant company of women, the inappropriate familiarity, the letters to women, the dreams and manifestations swirling around his own marriage and others' dreams and visions of taking new companions, the confessed temptation and unchecked love for one woman in particular, the ritual foot washing, and 13 pages of redactions hiding something more. Though the unredacted portions offer no direct confession of going to bed with women, they give plenty of room, motive, and opportunity, page after page of close interaction with all of these women, many of whose names begin tellingly with P, Rebecca Partington, Betsy Poole, Sister Perkins, Elizabeth Prince. But it's his ardent love and temptation for Sarah Crooks, the woman Heber Kimball would mentor in her relationships with men, that's most telling. Taken together, Clayton's diary offers substantial corroboration. He is indeed the strongest candidate for Fielding's Elder C, not because Fielding says so, but because Clayton's own writing corroborates point after point so closely what Fielding described. Sarah Crooks sits at the intersection of both stories, privately counseled by apostles Kimball and Young toward unconventional relationships and embroiled in scandal as a result, while also tied to the companion revelation through Clayton's diary, including her own dream of a future companion and her relationship with Clayton, foot washings included. Kimball may connect both threads. He baptized Clayton, and Clayton revered Kimball as his own, quote, father in the gospel. The same man who counseled Sarah was the missionary who built the Preston and Manchester branches and who was beloved by the very saints Fielding describes practicing under the companion revelation. Further evidence ties this circle together: cross-sex foot washing. Clayton was washed by Sarah Crooks and Betsy Poole. Kimball washed feet with Ellen Redmond before they went to bed. Woodruff had his feet washed by a, quote, worthy sister, followed by a prophecy that he pronounced on her future marriage. Young's feet were washed by Lucy Clayton, William's sister, and Parley Pratt publicly endorsed cross-sex foot washing in the Millennial Star. This pattern is striking. Cross-sex foot washing has almost no precedent in 19th century Christianity outside the Millerite spiritualists who practiced their own version of spiritual wifery, while Joseph Smith's ordinance, by contrast, was only ever strictly male to male. Notably, Young, Kimball, and Lorenzo Snow all claimed their own conversion to the spiritual wife doctrine happened either prior to or during this same British mission. Perhaps it's no coincidence that most of the era's prominent Mormon polygamists, Kimball, Clayton, Richards, Pratt, Turley, Woodruff, took their first plural wives from women they'd met while on their missions in England, and especially in Manchester. Even Young tried with Martha Brotherton, though she refused him, yet he succeeded in sealing himself to her after her death in 1870. We have a documented paper trail, too long to mention here, running from 1840 all the way to 1848, of spiritual wifery and spiritual wife doctrine related activity in England, independent of Nauvoo, which leaves real questions. If the events in Sarah Crooks' letter were purely innocent, why would married apostles meet alone with a young woman to mentor her in having relationships with men? What exactly did Sarah mean by, quote, I will leave you to guess the rest? Why would Young betray and abandon her once the relationship he'd counseled turned scandalous? And what did Young say to Brotherton to get him to leave Sarah? What did Kimball mean specifically by obtaining, quote, the mind of God regarding relationships with men? Does Kimball's language echo the manifestations encouraged to mostly women under the companion revelation? Were these manifestations of new companions how saints, who were mostly women, learned, quote, the mind of God? Who actually received that companion revelation? Given that Kimball is the earliest Mormon documented to believe the spiritual wife doctrine as early as 1839, and given that he was a man known for receiving and recording personal revelations on many occasions, is there a connection between the companion revelation and Kimball? Does the British practice of spiritual wifery have a connection to what unfolds in Nauvoo shortly after? Was early Mormon spiritual wifery and polygamy a fully formed doctrine that came all at once, or one that was still evolving? In 1842, Hiram Smith warned Parley Pratt against separating spouses during emigration from England to America, since so many British converts took new husbands or wives in America despite existing marriages back in England. Was that practice tied to what we've discussed here? And finally, if all of this evidence in England involved Joseph Smith instead of Kimball, Young, Clayton, and the rest, how would we interpret it, and what would we conclude? Whatever the full answers turn out to be, there is substantial, documented, contemporaneous evidence connecting Heber Chase Kimball, alongside a number of other Mormons, to the spiritual wife doctrine. Evidence independent of and predating any claimed connection to Joseph Smith. As Michelle said earlier, this is the kind of evidence we would expect to see from a secret polygamy practice, the kind historians have scoured the record to find regarding Joseph Smith, but haven't yet found. but it does exist, just with a different man. Hi, Whitney.
Hello, Jeremy.
So first of all, I'm really grateful to have you here. We're both a little sad, I know, because Michelle couldn't join us because her life is really quite crazy right now. And she graciously allowed us to use the audio of her presentation. And I remember at the end of the Sunstone presentation, we hadn't actually compared notes.
No.
We hadn't, we didn't know what any of the others were going to say. I'm kind of shocked we did that. But when we finished, I was blown away by the substance and how cohesive and coherent the whole thing was, and the overall message of the presentation about Heber's cause. And so it was so fun doing that with you. What was your overall impression after we finished the presentation?
Yeah, the same as Michelle. You know, one of the things whenever you're speaking at an event, you always kind of worry a little bit if one of the other speakers is going to use some of your quotes or some of your evidence or stuff, you know. And so I think we discussed really, really briefly a brief outline of what each other wanted to accomplish, but that was it. And so there was a little bit of, you know, the nerves going into it, like, oh, am I going to have to cut out some of mine because Michelle is going to say it in hers, or, you know, since I was second. But I was also just like really impressed how ours just all built on each other, and it was as if we had actually worked on all of them together. Like, it was pretty impressive to me.
I felt the same way. I felt exactly the same way. And in fact, afterward, Whitney, I spoke with one of the organizers, and I think you may have heard this conversation. Tell me if you didn't, but I asked, so, you know, these are people who don't share our views, right? They like at all. And I think they took quite a risk in having us there.
Yeah, I agree.
And you know, we won't share some of the private conversations that we have with people just to respect their anonymity and as far as the things that they shared with us. However, I was really shocked by the reception that we got. Some of the, I think, really magnanimous acknowledgments that were given to us. And one of the organizers, I asked him, so what is this? How does this presentation affect your understanding of polygamy? And reflexively, he said, well, you know, it doesn't change my mind about Joseph Smith's polygamy. I was like, okay, no, great, that's great.
Convince me in one presentation.
Right. But he said the England material, that's really something. Yeah. And by the way, have we given a comprehensive exposition? This is just a sketch. This is really just an introduction to this subject.
We each only spoke about 12 minutes.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, the word brief might not be brief enough for what the taste we gave.
It was so difficult to pack this material in that short period of time. And I'll tell you, when I was listening to Michelle and I was listening to you, I completely forgot about what I was going to say because I was so enthralled by the things that you were teaching, and I just absolutely loved it. So by the way, this is owed to you as the instigator of this line of inquiry. How many years ago, Whitney, did you just start to do a deep dive on Heber Kimball? And what got you on that road?
I was writing a book on Hiram Smith, and Hiram's first wife passed away. He remarries. That wife's name is Mary Fielding. And after Hiram's murdered, the church claims that within a few weeks, like first part of September, maybe middle of September, sometime in the month of September, so shortly after Hiram's murder, that she becomes a polygamous wife of Heber's. And so while I'm writing that book, you know, I wanted to do Mary justice, and I wanted to figure it out. I am a really good close friend to one of Mary's descendants, Mary and Hiram's descendants. And so I felt like I owed it to her to not blaspheme her grandmother, great-great-grandmother, if there wasn't truth behind it. And so I just felt like I needed to dig into that relationship. And as I did, I started unfolding all this information about Heber and Heber's first wife, Violet. And that's what got me into it. I was reading the letters, reading his journal, again, just trying to figure out Mary. And just quickly, I came to the conclusion that Mary was not a polygamous wife in the sense that Heber's other wives were. She was basically tricked into being a polygamist wife. He told her if she was sealed to, she could be sealed to Hiram. She'd never been sealed to Hiram while he was living. So she could be sealed to Hiram if she was also sealed to a living spouse, and that was him. But he never treated her as a spouse. He wrote her a letter, and we're going to talk about, I think you and I are going to discuss some of his letters. His one remaining letter I could find written to Mary Fielding Smith is like not even like a good friend. It's almost like a condescending friend. Like he's pretty condescending to her, and then actually asks her to give his love to her sister. So, and then when Mary gets to Utah, she takes the children and she moves off on her own and lives on her own, and only really comes to see him right after polygamy is announced publicly. She comes to Salt Lake to visit him, ends up getting ill, and is at his home for 2 weeks until she passes away. And then he buries her in a pauper's grave without a headstone. So that's how he took care of that wife.
My goodness.
But because of my deep respect and love for this good friend of mine, that's what got me into figuring out. I really was just trying to figure out if Mary Fielding Smith believed in polygamy, which actually just led me to do a deeper dive into Heber C. Kimball.
So, and I remember, I don't know how many years ago, you shared with me this document you'd compiled with quotes from I don't know how many letters, it was numerous letters, the evidence of his practice of the spiritual wife doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And by the way, his letters between himself and his wife Violet, we say Violet because there's sometimes when they say, when it's pronounced, I know some people say Vilate because it's spelled Bilate, but
right.
There's it's very likely that it was Violet.
Well, it was actually an old spelling of the name Violet.
That's correct. So,
yeah.
Whatever, people can call it how they want, but we say Violet. It was astonishing to me when I read the document you'd compiled, because you see this pattern emerge,
mm-hmm.
and you see how it is that he, and we'll talk about this here in a second, how it is that he is, as Michelle mentioned, and as I capped off in the presentation, what the evidence of a secret polygamy practice actually looks like. It looks like Heber's letters.
Yes.
Violet, right?
Like if we had this same evidence for Joseph Smith, case closed.
Case closed, it would be done. That's right.
Right.
That's right. And this is at the very time when the argument goes that it was too dangerous to write a letter. It was too well, and by the way, in his letters, he's constantly saying, don't tell anyone, burn this, or keep it in your bosom. Our very lives are at stake, right?
Yeah.
So he's acknowledging how dangerous it is, but we have the letters to prove it.
Right.
We have the journal entries from him and from Clayton, for example, to show what this secret practice looks like. But we owe you forever, because you made, I think, one of the most important discoveries. I have no idea why this hasn't been out. Stanley B. Kimball did his biography, obviously didn't include this, but he had access to it. He knew it was there, unless for whatever reason he couldn't see it. Can you describe to us, you mentioned it briefly, but can you please describe to us the January 21st, 1841 entry about Ellen Redmond, and what it was like when you found that entry? So recap it for us so the audience can really let this sink in, what it is. For those who have not heard this, Whitney, what is this entry?
So this is an entry about Ellen Balfour Redmond. When I first was reading Heber's journals, I was reading the version that Stanley B. Kimball published, which was on the Potter's Wheel, and he claims it's a faithful compilation. But I've always been someone who, if I can get the actual original source, I want to see the original source. I really enjoy looking at their handwriting, at the way they, compiled their journals. I just find it very fascinating. So luckily, it's on the Church History Library website on their catalog, digitized, so I could just sit at home and look at it. I have a difficult time believing that he didn't see what I found, because it is pretty apparent, but it's pretty apparent that somebody tried to erase some pretty key words. And
Yes.
then obviously with our technology today, where we can take something small and really magnify it, it made
Yes.
it super clear. But it's Ellen Balfour Redmond has followed. She's written a letter to Violet, which I talked about in my presentation, where she's followed the apostles who baptized her. She's followed them to England, and then she's hanging out with them quite a bit and being their personal secretaries and writing their letters. And he makes the statement in that January 21st, 1841 journal entry that she comes by his apartment. Wilford Woodruff goes off to preach. He stays there with Ellen. Some other people, the Copelands and some other people, come by to visit. And then it's not really clear if it's like a whole group thing or if they leave and it's just he and Ellen. But he then ends with saying, Ellen combed my hair, washed my feet. And that's where Stanley ends, comb my hair and wash my feet, ends. But then the next section says, and we went to bed. So
That's
you
right.
could, a nice naive look would be like, oh, she like went into another room and went to bed, or she like left and went to bed, or just he went to bed, like we went to bed, could be he and Wilford. But again, I think to me, it's pretty obvious that he and Ellen, and there's something with this whole, he and William Clayton foot washing, as you know, is throughout their writings, and they a lot of times tend to have that and went to bed afterwards. And the combing hair, which I find interesting, combing and cutting hair, like I don't think his hair grows fast enough for the number of women who are constantly there combing and cutting his hair.
Correct.
But, and in Victorian England, like that's pretty intimate. Men went to barbers who were men. They didn't go to women to touch their hair. So that's an interesting thing to think about. But again, I just think if we had the same exact journal entry, and it was written in provable handwriting of Joseph Smith, it would it would legitimately be case closed, right?
Exactly, with Louisa Beeman. That's exactly right.
Right. And so it's just, again, Heber, to me, I felt like reading through his second English mission, like growing up in the LDS church, we have like Wilford Woodruff, Turn It Upside Down, and it's the double M, Marvelous Missionary. And we hear about their hundreds of thousands of converts on their English missions. And maybe Wilford, because it does seem like Heber's a lot like, oh, Wilford don't have to preach while Heber's off socializing and sightseeing. But you just get the feeling through the letters he starts writing to Violet, and then this journal, that this is really when he starts really embracing polygamy, spiritual wifery. It was called spiritual wifery. I know you've talked about it a lot. It was called spiritual wifery because legally they could only be married to one wife. But they could then do a ceremony where they were married by God or the spirits. It was a spiritual marriage, but then they, assumed it gave them all the rights of a legal marriage. So quite legitimately, that was a great definition for them to be called a spiritual wife, because they were in spirit only and whatever. So
this is so critical. I'm actually astonished that this entry has never been addressed. As far as I'm aware, you were the very first to bring it to the public's attention, and we owe you that, because it got me started down a road of inquiry, and I know it's helped Michelle look at things. And interestingly enough, Michelle discovered this 1839 revelation that she talked about, and then I found the Sarah Crooks letter, and you put these things together, you put these pieces together, we now have this picture of this cause, right? This cause. Mm-hmm. See, when he talks about the cause, audience, he talks about it in a number of letters. I think you referenced it very briefly because you didn't have time, but in his letters, he talks about the cause that he's embraced, which in like February 7th, 1841, this is that very time right after he's gone to bed with Ellen Redmond. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, let me pause on that for a second. Some will say, it doesn't say that they had sexual intercourse. It just says they went to... Okay. First of all, he's a married man, alone in an apartment with a woman. Okay. They're most likely in the bedroom area. Okay. And where's she going to sleep? On a couch downstairs? And by the way, Wilford Woodruff goes out and preaches, and he returns later that evening. So is she taking a nap? To assume that is... Now, we could interpret it that way, but to assume we're just taking a nap with a married woman, a married man with a single woman, okay, widowed, single woman, in an apartment alone. That very fact is is highly inappropriate for an apostle to be doing that, especially in Victorian England times. And people will say, well, in Victorian England, they had all kinds of, loose morals. It's yes, there's always been prostitutes and sexuality and affairs and etc., but it wasn't countenanced by the society. Okay, the society nor the churches did not countenance this behavior like today. Let's not put presentism on this time period.
Right.
It would have been highly inappropriate for him to be alone
and
in an apartment.
Well, sorry to cut you off.
No, please.
I was just going to say, one of the things that that they write about in the Seer Map periodical, when Orson Pratt goes to Washington, D.C. and starts writing the Seer, one of the, so they're trying to do this pro-polygamy, marketing, basically, and trying to market it to the Christian world. And one of the things that they kind of pride themselves on is that the Christian men pretend to be faithful and then have mistresses hidden away, and they let their wives be out and known. So for instance, there are records of women in England that they brought to Utah who were mistresses in England and left the men to come be with the Mormons because they could be a mistress that could hold her head up high because she's called a wife. So it's just interesting, like you said, like Victorian England, like these things were not countenanced. And so even the quote unquote morally good men, if they were behaving like this, did it in secret.
That's right. And we have this notion, and it's an anachronistic notion of this division, this grand division between this noble celestial plural marriage on the one hand, and this evolving, because it was evolving, principle of the spiritual wife doctrine, which took an evolving form. And as I introduced to the audience with the Sarah Crooks letter last week, and as we discussed a little bit today, and as I will be discussing in greater depth later, she protests in her letter, but I've been virtuous. She's not saying I didn't do anything that others wouldn't think is virtuous. Okay, Augusta Cobb left her husband and 7 children, 5 of her 7 children, to join Brigham Young. She never divorced her husband. He divorced her 3 years later. She never divorced her husband and became Brigham's plural wife and had sexual intercourse with him. Okay, Zina Huntington was 8 months pregnant with Henry Jacobs' baby while Henry stood behind her with her own father present while Brigham Young married her. Then Brigham Young sent Henry Jacobs on a mission. And all the while Henry is writing Zina Huntington, who then has her baby. Has Henry's baby. Henry's writing her love letters and saying how much he misses her and he wishes they could be back together. Meanwhile, Zina joins Brigham's family without divorcing Henry, and he fathers a child with Zina. Okay, would Zina believe that she's unvirtuous? No. But would others outside of the Mormon culture at the time believe she was unvirtuous? Yes. So we need to understand, Heber believed, this is why the cause is so important. He believed in this letter, this is so important. February 17, 1841, it's the first time he mentions the law that leads to the celestial worlds that you mentioned. Yeah. The cause to him is the law that leads to the celestial worlds, which all the prophets and apostles that has taken the course have embraced, so that we can have the same glory with them, okay? This is what in his mind, what the ancient fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob did, right? Do the works of Abraham.
Yeah.
This is that cause, and it's evident here. Now, why can we with confidence say that the cause in 1841 is the same cause and just 2 years later, when he's when he's actively practicing the pursuit of spiritual wives? Because he says it again. The Lord has opened my eyes, July 22nd, 1843. Lord has opened my eyes so I can see the necessity of being diligent in the cause that we, now because he's brought Violet into it, that we have embraced. He embraced it in England. He's trying to get Violet to embrace it fully, and now she's finally embraced it with him in 1843. It's a glorious cause. This part here, our lives are at stake. They may be required of us. Why? Because this is illegal, and if they get caught, you could get in trouble, okay? We must press forward in the name of Elijah's God and seek to exalt each other in the sight of God and men. What do we know about the spiritual wife doctrine that becomes celestial plural marriage? This is the principle that exalts them, okay? And then again, we have this letter, June. This is June 22nd, this is a month before. He mentions also We are in a critical place. I feel as though I'd rather die than do anything to bring a wound on the cause we have embraced. Okay. How important is this cause to him, Whitney? This is
everything. I believe he really does believe he will only be exalted by doing this.
That's right. Let me mention, this is so interesting. We'll come back to this as well, but you call this his apology letter. Can you explain the apology letter to us?
Yeah, I think at the top of it, it even says basically like, burn this. Yes. And luckily for us, it did not get burned. And then it also got photographed and digitized, and you can look at it from the comfort of your own home.
Yes.
So it starts off as an apology letter, and he's in a meeting in Salt Lake City, and it has that written somewhere on there. And this letter, when I found it, I just was floored. I just thought, wow, this man really had, I would say, deluded himself into believing that he could have intimate relations with anyone. And then he outright admits it to his wife. So to me, something must have happened. Violet found out something, and she's hurt and upset, right? Okay. So he's in this meeting that he's got to go to, and he knows he's left her pretty upset. And so he pens this note: no one can supersede you. So again, so I look at polygamy as kind of like the ultimate multi-level marketing, yeah. And they're even like the Martha Brotherton letter. She says that they tell her that the ones who are the earliest to accept it will be the most exalted queens and have more to rule over in the
Sounds like a doTERRA meeting.
Right? So here he's saying, no one can supersede you because you're my first wife. You're the wife.
Sorry for all the doTERRA people out there. I apologize. Sorry, keep going.
Right. So he's basically reassuring her that no matter how many women I've slept with, you're still going to be the queen of our kingdom, right? Yes. What I have done is according to the mind and will of God for his glory and mine. So will be for thine. Let me say to you, VK, every son and daughter that is brought forth by the wives that are given to me will add to your glory as much as it will to them. They are given to me for this purpose and for no other. I am a father of lives to give lives to those that wish to receive. Woman is to receive from the man. What I have done has been by stolen moments for the purpose to save your feelings.
Let's pause right there. What's he saying? What's he saying? This feels like kind of softer language. What's he really saying?
He's saying he's having adulterous relationships with anyone who'll do it with him behind his back.
And in his mind, this is God's mandate to him because he has been given power to give life to, meaning his seed, okay? Any woman that will receive his seed. Sorry to be crass, folks. That's exactly what he's saying. Keep going.
Well, and the whole idea by stolen moments, I mean, here we are, 1849, we're in Salt Lake City. We're not worried about mobs coming and running us off because we're practicing polygamy.
Right.
So you have to say, why are we having to do it by stolen moments?
What's he doing in the stolen moments?
Well, and why are the women, I mean, if you can have polygamy and you can have 50, 60, 100 wives, why do you have to have women who Violet doesn't know about?
That's astonishing. We're gonna cap this off in a second, but I keep going because I want to absorb this entire letter is so important. For those of you who don't know it, go and look it up on the Church History Library, February 12th, 1849, Heber Kimball's letter to Violet. Go and study it and memorize it. This tells you so much of what we need to understand about Heber Kimball. Keep going.
Well, and I think it tells you the mind of the polygamous men in general. I think this really was their core doctrine and belief. So what I've done has been by stolen moments for the purpose to save your feelings, and that alone on the count of the love I have for you. I beg of you to consider my case, as you cannot do the work that God has required of me. No one can do my work but myself. Meaning, obviously, Violet can't go get a bunch of women pregnant. Like, obviously, right?
Exactly.
No, Violet, look and see that God has put power into my hands for the purpose to get women to myself and those that he has given to me.
That's right. Okay, so, and by the way, Claire Barris has written an essay on this, on the revelation that Heber gets about the lawless women.
Oh, the lawless
if you want to read a really
yes.
fantastic exposition of that revelation, go find Claire Barris' essay. I believe on the Journal of Mormon Polygamy. It's really great. But because this will not be unique to Violet, he will have more and more of these experiences with other very dissatisfied wives.
Yes.
But the point is that the major point about this is, number one, his attitude. I have power to give life, meaning I can have relations with any woman who will receive it from me, because that is my divine right.
Well, and it's theirs. I mean, this whole thing, woman is to receive. Like, that's all I was created for.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
All you're good for. You got to risk. You're just there to receive from us men.
Now let's go here. So this is one of the most astonishing. When I read this the first time, I don't even remember how I found it. When I read this the first time, I just about fell over in my chair. This man had the temerity to actually say these words at his own wife's funeral. I can say in our generation now that there never was a person ever fully as just and true as she was to me. She never scandalized me. Okay. She loved me in health and sickness. In this, I say to all my sisters, she's an example. Be like my wife, sisters. Be like her. Don't scandalize me. I took in the neighborhood, he doesn't even know. I took in the neighborhood of 40 wives, and many of them unbeknown to her. Okay, now he's going to say this next part. I want to qualify this. He says, Joseph would not let me tell her. That was one of my most suffering conditions. Why do we know that that's not true? Because he only had one plural wife that we know of during Joseph's lifetime. And Violet knew about Sarah Noon.
Yes.
Okay. That statement right there is not true. Okay. So he's coloring the past.
Well, we're in 1867. So think about what's happening in 1867 and why he's got to throw this little comment in there to try and shore up the idea that this all came from Joseph.
So he puts it on Joseph that Joseph made her be quiet, him be quiet. Okay. Joseph would not let me tell her. It was one of my most suffering conditions. This is a theme, by the way, that all this stuff caused him to suffer. They desired the grave, and he went into a deep depression, etc. One of his most suffering conditions was to do this, but I did. And when I went into the temple, Violet gave them to me. So he took all these women that Violet didn't know about, but then she gave them to me, and she was wonderful about it. And I wanted, she should have the honor as long as she wanted it. In these things, she has shown an excellent example. This, Brother Brigham knows. Okay, so Brigham knows all this stuff. He knows all about everything Heber was doing. He knows it better than anyone, any other one here knows. He knows me. Brother Brigham has always remembered me. He will never forget me, worlds without end. Mark that. When you see him in heaven, you see me there, and I will never be separated. That man or woman never can prosper that seeks the separation, no, never, worlds without end. He loved Brigham more than he loved his wives, and he says that, by the way. Okay, so, okay, this is, please, scholars, historians, please, let's talk about this.
Yeah.
He took wives, many of them without Violet's knowledge, but what does he say? He says, she gave them to me in 1846, but what's he doing in 1849? Out of Joseph's sight, with Joseph nowhere in sight, he's still doing it. After 1846, he's still going around giving life, having sexual intercourse with spiritual wives. So the question I have for every scholar, every historian, and every interested person, how many wives did this man actually take? And who can we consider a wife? This is something to look into. It is very common that they would take a wife and she'd leave 6 months later.
Yeah.
Right? It happened with William Clayton, happened with Heber Kimball, happened with Brigham Young. They would not even be divorced because the women would just leave.
Yeah.
They'd be on their own and destitute and whatever. But this happened a lot. So I have a question. Is Ellen Redmond a spiritual wife? I mean, would you consider her a concubine or a spiritual wife under the many wives and concubines doctrine? What are your thoughts on that, Whitney?
I think that's being charitable. I actually think of her more just as a mistress, like a legitimate mistress.
Do you think Heber would have considered her that, though?
I don't know what he would have considered her. I honestly think when I read those early England, the early portion of his second mission to England, you gotta read more of it. It's kind of crazy. There's some crazy stuff in it, that it isn't even just dealing with women. Just as him as a person, he just is courting a lot, playing a lot, sightseeing a lot, but there's some kind of a little bit of crazy stuff in there. And I just think that maybe he was, and like we said earlier, like our presentations, we're kind of trying to prove in this Sunstone presentation that Heber was kind of experimenting with it during that time period. He really hadn't, I don't think, solidified it into plural wives. I think there was an earlier adaptation of it, and I think this is where Ellen fits, that an earlier adaptation of spiritual wives was anyone you have sexual relations with, you can do it once, never see them again. But when you die and you're in heaven, they're going to be in your harem of wives.
I think that's very astute. By the way, this was the Oneida clan had a form of that. It was basically kind of polyamory. The Cochranites had a form of that where women and men could be passed around. It was basically a kind of a form.
John William Noyce was another big one,
right?
In the New
and so these were not unique things. And if we look at and I'll be discussing this more later, if we look at the companion revelation, what that allowed, and by the way, what was going on in England, it caused women to be dissatisfied with their husbands. This is mentioned by Charles D. Smith in his 1846 entry in his journal, that the spiritual wife system, he mentions, is causing women to want husbands outside of their marriage. So the point of this is it allowed women to have extramarital and sexual partners, which was very different.
Yeah, well, in Augusta Cobb's divorce, one of the witnesses against her on behalf of her husband testifies that she told him that she loved Brigham Young's doctrine of plural marriage because it gave her a wife she could love.
That's right. And they taught these women that they could leave their current marriages, which echoes exactly what the companion revelation says. They could get the mind and will of the Lord through a dream and a manifestation. They could learn who their new companions could be. This is what apparently Heber Kimball was teaching Sarah Crooks. So long as it was consistent, now she writes in veiled language, so long as it was consistent with the mind of the Lord, she could give her heart to any man. Now, she says, I'll leave you to guess the rest, what I was doing, as though Brigham need not have it explained to him. If we triangulate to Heber Kimball, well, it's very likely and reasonable to infer that what she's talking about is what Heber Kimball was doing with Ellen Redmond. These are momentary relationships that aren't permanent. So I think you're right. I think that's why when you call it just a typical affair or a mistress, he would still probably look at it as holy, as sanctioned by God, and would consider it an affair. I don't. Do you think he would have considered that to be?
No, because I think that the what opened up these men. So I mean, people who know me know that I believe this is a false spirit and deception. But think about, you're an apostle. You're everywhere you go. Like his earlier letters, there's a lot of apostle worship going on. When he's writing home to Violet, people are giving them gifts, and women give him a lot of silk handkerchiefs. And he gets kind of, he's put up on this pedestal, like, you're an apostle. And so
there's this meeting with Violet when they get to America, where these group of women from Manchester, they're weeping. They're weeping when they see his picture because they love him so much. It's really bizarre.
Yes.
Keep going.
So you've elevated them, right? And so think about if you're a man like that, and you're traveling without your wife, and you've got women. I mean, it's kind of like the whole, what do they call those that follow rock stars around, right? Like you've got your groupies, you got your apostle groupies, right? That's what that's literally what I thought of Ellen when I read that she followed. I'm like, oh, she's like a groupie, right? Yes. And so you've got these women fawning all over you. Well, you're tempted. And so what do you do if you're a high and holy righteous man who can't handle looking in the mirror and admitting, I have weaknesses of the flesh? Oh, Abraham, we think maybe had more than one wife. Oh, we're supposed to be like him, father of many nations. You can see where this doctrine starts developing, all as a way to justify the weaknesses of the flesh, instead of just standing up and saying, no, like, Satan, get behind me. It's like justifying. And then again, like I said, one of the things that made Orson Pratt pretty upset about Christians condemning Mormons for polygamy was he's like, well, you have mistresses all over. We at least call ours wives.
That's right.
I mean, you can see the formulation of things. So you can see that it's these high and holy men, and then you can see that maybe other men start getting involved. So by the time they get to Nauvoo, it's now turning into, oh, well, you've got to have a higher priesthood. And then that new companion revelation, you can take that and these ideas, and you can see by the time they get to Salt Lake, that now Brigham's saying, women, you can leave a man for another man that has higher priesthood. So you can kind of see where this is evolving, and it's all evolving into, because guess what? There's the same exact percentage of boys born as girls, pretty close, 51% boys, more boys than girls. And then we get into a system like this, and what happens? We have not enough women, so we've got to get younger and younger, and we've got to now somehow separate that this is only for the most spiritual. I mean, there's a young girl, I think her name is Alice Geen, that right after Hiram and Joseph are murdered, her parents are converted by Heber along New England. They come to Nauvoo. She gets sick, and Heber visits her every day and helps take care of her. She's deathly sick. And she literally writes in her journal that he tells her father that if she marries him, she will have exaltation in heaven because she'll be linked to an apostle. And she's just like giddy that an apostle would condescend to be married to her. So you can see how this just starts, the pride, the arrogance, all in the name of, I mean, it's Hiram Smith's letter to the saints in England saying, the man no sooner has left his family and is on the waters of the ocean before the graces of the harlot have overtaken him. Like, come on, man, just call it what it is. You're human, you have failings and weaknesses. And they just found, quite honestly, a brilliant way to justify imbibing in that.
Well, and I think you mentioned something that's key. He embraced this spirit. Let's go back to this February 17, 1841 letter. Then I want to actually conclude this conversation with one more thought. He says, I know that that no man can get it, meaning salvation, on any other principles than the principles of virtue, which is one of the attributes of the Almighty. And I pray the Almighty will help you and me to fulfill in all points the law that leads to the celestial world. So this law that allows him to give life through sexual intercourse with as many women as will receive has become virtuous. Okay? He, in his mind, has embraced the spirit that has told him, you are an apostle, you are righteous, you are select. Other men cannot do this. You can do this because God gives you. It's consistent with his mind about you, Heber, about you. Not every man can do this. You can do this because you're righteous. Therefore, you can give life to any woman who will receive. I think that these ideas were formulating in his mind sometime maybe earlier than 1839. Who knows exactly when, but he gets a revelation, 1839. He starts developing this. Helen says that she heard him talk about this. He was talking about enough that his own daughter hears it. She says, before Joseph ever said a word to him. And then he's talking about it on his second mission to England this very same time. Now he's meeting with Sarah Crooks. He's meeting with Ellen Redmond. He's spending time with Sarah Sangiovanni. All of these women that are filled in his journal. Okay. So we have this pattern. Now I want to mention this, Whitney. Tell the audience what his letters reveal about how he would court and care for spiritual wives, vis-a-vis and via Violet. How would he do that? And what kinds of things would he say in the letters, etc.? I have some of them here we can refer to.
Yeah. You know, it's super interesting to me. There's a letter about this same time as this one that Violet writes to Heber, and she's at first, I think, really actually excited about this idea. She seems very much like she's kind of the matchmaker. So to kind of get an understanding of Violet's personality, back in 1835-ish in Kirtland, 1836, when Hiram's first wife dies and he marries Mary, Mary had lived with Heber and Violet for a short little time. She was a single woman who in her 30s and pretty poor. And so she would try to live with different people and work to provide for herself. And so Violet actually writes to Heber and tells him of their marriage, and then starts talking about Parley P. Pratt, who, mind you, is married and has been married and was married before Mary even gets converted to the church. And she's like saying, like, basically like, oh, poor Parley, he's so sad that she's got somebody better. So you kind of get this feeling that, like, there was no shame in the fact that she knew Parley P. Pratt liked Mary. In fact, there was a big scandal in the church with Parley P. Pratt and his, kind of trying to
in
court.
1837, I think, is that correct?
Mhm.
1837.
Yeah, like in it. So they even talk about it in the temple. Like Parley comes in and talks, and I've been accused of adultery. And then in the letter from Mary, she's to her sister, she says, oh, his brother came to see me. And I said, do you really want to know the truth about your brother? So then you put that letter together with then Violet's letter, and you go, oh, so Parley did have something for Mary, and Violet like thinks it's cute. So you kind of start getting the idea of Violet's mind is she's kind of loves love and doesn't necessarily have boundaries around it.
Mm.
So then it's sort of like you can see where she's maybe susceptible to him planting these new ideas into her mind. And
Yes.
and so then now by now in 1843, she's kind of helping, like he would convert women. They would get sent to Nauvoo, they'd live with Violet, and men would be sent there to get wives. And so
Yes.
she would matchmake to married men, these young girls. And so a lot of his letters start, this is the time period like after this England mission where his letters start being filled with talking about these other women and asking Violet to, so he's having his own wife go to these women and say, Heber sends you his love. Heber's thinking of you. Heber wants, your shoe size so he can bring you shoes. And so he's really...
So he doesn't have to do the courtship directly himself.
No, they really... And that goes with Martha Brotherton and some others. I think the Partridge Sisters and some others that talk about these older women who would be the ones that would kind of indoctrinate them into this. So,
yes.
Gosh, it's an upsetting idea for me
Yes.
to think of another woman helping instigate her husband with young girls. Like in our world today, that would not, the wife would also be charged with a crime.
Yeah, absolutely. And so to understand the role that Violet played, first of all, I think Violet suffered quite a bit. And I think she was really tossed and torn about these ideas.
You
but
definitely
she also
see it after around this time period when he really, especially after Joseph and Hiram are killed, you really start seeing her, like she even has one letter where she tells him, stop flattering me. I know what you're doing. Wow. Like you kind of see her, and part of it is like she's also growing up. Like she's not a young woman anymore. Like she's starting to get a mind of her own and like, maybe not thinking this is so great anymore.
So if we triangulate this to his later statement, if he took 40 wives, by the way, that's between 1842, 41, 42. We don't know exactly when he takes Sarah Noon as a wife. It's hard to know. Sarah Noon was married to William Noon. Mm-hmm. The later stories are that he was a drunk. That's not true. He was an elder in good standing in the church, and Heber marries her and then has a child by her. That's one of the first polygamous children born. I think William Clayton's was first, then Heber has a child. So by the way, we have evidence of children as part of the secret practice of polygamy going on.
Right.
And so during this time, we have no idea how many women, because we have basically a 3-year period, 1843 to 46, or to January 46. We've got a 2.5 to 3 year period. This is when he's doing it. So Violet's participating in some of it, but by no means all of it, and most likely hardly any of it compared to what he's actually doing.
Yeah, okay. I think by 1849, I think she's done. I think the whole apology letter is he's panicking that first wife's going to leave him. And
that's right. And so for the audience, I would recommend that you go and you look up Heber's letters to Violet and you start reading them. Like, for example, he says, I dreamt of you last night, Violet, but I saw Sister Billings. This is one of the sisters that he's pursuing. And Sariah, that's Sarah Noon. And I thought Sister Billings seemed to have some feelings toward me. I asked her how Sariah felt. She says she is quite put out of the way. I saw Sariah and spoke to her. She seemed to be quite offended. I felt quite bad on account of it, but it was a dream. So he's communicating these these ideas and feelings to Violet about these women. And this is a theme that runs through so many of his letters. He says, give my love to Sister S before she's not forgotten now. So he's constantly asking Violet to pass on his love and regards to women as inducements to see their reaction, to see what they say. Remember me to this woman. Send my love. In this one in August 1843, the lines from Sister S, they did not come amiss. I hope she will remember me again. My best love to her. Remember me to Brother Nobles and wife and to old lady and Sister Allie Whitney and wife Sariah. Do not expose me to anyone on earth, for I'm a child. I do not read this to anyone, for they think I'm a fool. I am foolish and a child. Interesting. And so he continues to express these things. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up, in the audience, you can go look up his letters. You'll find this stuff throughout this time period. I wanted to go back to December 1840 and then January 27th, 1841, and just look at this. In his letter from December 1840, Helen quotes this in the Women's Exponent. It says the following: Sister Sarah Milliken and Louisa Beeman were here yesterday. This is from Violet to Heber. Heber's on the way to England. Yeah. Okay. He's, I think, in New York, or he's maybe on the boat at this point. No, he's in New York at this point. So, and I believe he is meeting with women in New York. This is where he meets with Ellen Redmond, and he meets a number of sisters in this area. Okay, so she says, Sister Sarah Milliken and Louisa Beeman. So those who know Louisa Beeman, she is alleged to be one of Joseph Smith's first, I think she's the first plural wife in Nauvoo. She's alleged to be. There's some disagreement about that, but Louisa Beeman. They were here yesterday and wish to be remembered to you and brethren. Also, Sister Laura and Abigail Pittman, they are faithful to pray for you. They say you promised if they would be faithful, they should be partakers of your blessings. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then he writes back about a month later. Now there are some more I love, mentioned once in my letters, that Sister Louisa Beeman and Sarah Milliken. I'm glad they mentioned the Flakins, those are the Pitkins, he spells it wrong, before I'd forgotten them. By the way, he takes Laura and Abigail Pitkin as spiritual wives later in Nauvoo. He does not succeed with Louisa Beeman, but the question that I have is, should we ask the question, was he possibly interested in Louisa Beeman as one of these potential wives? We know that he was potentially interested in Elizabeth Brotherton, who Parley married, because Violet in 1843, in July of 1843, mentions that Parley is interested in Elizabeth, and she says, I don't really want to tell you because I know you'll be upset, Heber. And I think the reason for that, reasonably inferred, is that Heber was interested in Elizabeth Brotherton, who was Martha Brotherton's family, who was the brother Brotherton who was spending all that time with Sarah Crooks that got them in trouble and got Sarah Crooks branded as unvirtuous in Manchester. So this is how all this fits together.
Well, look at the other thing here. You've got Heber connected to Louisa Beeman and to Sarah Ann Whitney. So how many of the purported wives of Joseph Smith were actually wives of Heber and Brigham? And
like for example, Emily Partridge. She, in her memoirs, she expresses extraordinary admiration, almost fawning admiration for Heber Kimball. And the story goes that Heber brought her to his house and he married Emily to Joseph on March 4th, 1843. Is it possible that it was just Heber? I think it's a question that ought to be asked, okay? Especially when we know that Brigham Young lied to Augusta Cobb and said Joseph will come and seal us, and then Brigham did the sealing himself, and then Augusta would later say that Joseph was there. But she admitted in her private letters that Joseph was not there. I think these are reasonable questions to ask. So should we ask the question about Louisa? Finally, let's wrap this up.
Okay.
As Michelle said in the beginning, what would a secret practice of polygamy look like? One of the things that people say is, well, we would expect that we would find no evidence. We'd expect it because it was so secret and so illegal, and Joseph was so afraid, and he instructed people to keep things quiet, even though, for example, after he received the revelation, apparently he showed it to all the leading authorities, to some of the leading authorities of the church. He showed it to all these people. He was talking about it at the High Council. But it was super hush. We don't want to talk about this, except they're talking about it to everybody. Right. According to George A. Smith, there was 200 people that knew about it. 200 people? What? You get 5 people to know something. You can't keep that cat in the bag anymore.
Right. Yep.
But 200 people? Okay. This is what the evidence of a secret practice of polygamy looks like. We have Heber admitting in his own journal in 1839, he interprets this dream. God says you will yet have many sons and daughters, and he interprets that will be fulfilled through the plurality of wives. Helen says she heard him saying these things, and he then speaking about it in England. We have Lorenzo Snow saying, hey, I learned about it there. Brigham Young says, I got my testimony of it there. In 1841, he's actively believing in, and I believe promoting, the spiritual wife doctrine in England. I think the Sarah Crooks letter is a critical piece of evidence. I'm going to give you all the receipts on why the interpretation of that letter is that it's evidence of the spiritual wife doctrine. And we've got all the courting of women from 41 to through, probably 46 actually, of Heber and Violet and all the letters. We have their first child. There's actually a child, where Joseph, there's not. I know there's people who say, well, contraception and pull-out method and abortion. But the whole point of getting spiritual wives was actually to have children. So I think we have a problem there with Joseph. We don't have a problem with Heber. And as soon as Joseph's dead, the children, they just start popping up like weeds. Then in 1849, we have the apology letter. 1867, we have him admitting he's taking all these wives without Violet's knowledge. Now, 1866, however, okay, what does he say in 1866 about how and when he learned? What is his official story about how and when he learned the principles of the spiritual wife doctrine? He doesn't call it that in this sentence, but for the first time. When did he learn it, according to his telling?
Well, wasn't his telling that when he gets back from England, Joseph takes him aside and tells him all about it? And then there's the whole story of Violet saying, I knew something was wrong with Heber, and I prayed and prayed, and God gave me a vision of the celestial kingdom, and I went to him, and he said, yes, I didn't want to tell you, but I already have a wife, right?
Yes. So he says this in 18, this is so critical. And folks, scholars, historians, can we please reconcile what we're laying out here with this?
Yeah.
Quote, 1866, this is a discourse. You can find it in the Journal of Discourses. I can recollect well when Joseph Smith, the prophet, received revelation. Okay. I received a revelation from God through Joseph, through him, myself once, in the presence of President B. Young and Willard Richards. And it was, thus saith the Lord. What was it now? I'm going to tell you right out, as people do not believe that polygamy started with the prophet. It was, thus saith the Lord, for my servant Willard and Brigham and Heber to take more wives. Okay. For this is pleasing in my God's sight. Now, let's pause for a second. This is July of 1841, supposedly. This is 2 years prior to the official revelation. So this is an additional polygamy revelation targeted at these 3 men. I want the audience to remember what we've talked about, and we'll talk about it more, about Augusta Cobb claiming that Brigham said, also, Joseph's got a revelation about the 2 of us, okay, to get together, and you can leave your husband, okay, which he said was written down. Well, Heber is saying in 1866, there was another revelation. We got all these revelations. We got the companion revelation. We got Martha Brotherton saying there's a revelation. We got Heber saying there's a revelation. Brigham's mentioning a revelation to a guy in Boston in July. Catherine Lewis is saying the elders are talking to her about a revelation. We got all these revelations popping up. And they're not all the July 12th, 1843 revelation. In fact, many of them are different. Okay. I just want to point that out. Then he says, it's right in my God's sight, pleasing in my God's sight. And now they say we established polygamy. And when we came home in 1841, he says, and now they say we established polygamy, meaning, like we didn't do this. We didn't do it. Okay. And he says, when we came home in 1841 from where? From the British mission, we had not been home over 6 days. Okay. So they get home July 1st, 1841. So this would be by roughly July 7th. Before Joseph called us together and laid these things before us the first time we knew of them. Please reconcile that with everything else we've been presenting. And then Joseph received a revelation. Now I'm telling you what I know. If I do not anybody believe it, try. One of the greatest things, I never felt more sorrowful. He starts telling about this stuff and Helen says he was so depressed and it was awful for my father. And yet, in 1841, February, just a few months before this, he's writing home going, the cause I've embraced, the law that leads to the celestial worlds, because I just went to bed with Ellen Redmond. who's written you a letter calling you her dear sister and saying we're bound in the everlasting covenant. Okay, folks, if there's smoke like this, there's real fire. This is incompatible with everything we've been saying, and I believe it renders this statement so unreliable that if you believe it, I got a bridge at the top of the North Pole where Santa Claus lives that I think is prime real estate that's going for a steal. So please, I'm the agent on that property. I will sell it to you. So can we please acknowledge there's a problem with the story? This is what that conversation with the organizer of Sunstone, this is what got him going. I said, is there a conversation to be had about some of the murkiness of this stuff? He goes, yeah, there's a conversation to be had, okay? Yeah. It's not clean. It's more than messy, it's broken. The story's broken, folks. And this is what we're presenting here. Whitney, I applaud you because you got us down this road. I'm so grateful for you and for our association together. I consider you a dear friend, and I consider you a fellow mission companion in this, if you will. You know, this is of sorts. This is a mission to clear the Smith name, right?
Yes.
To help get rid of this nonsense, because it's nonsense. And we have a better model for I'm sorry, I'm going to declare it. I believe we have a better, more coherent, more consistent model for understanding the history than early accusations that are all fall apart when you look at them, and later stories that are incongruent, contradictory, and oftentimes provably false. Okay, and they don't cohere like has been said, and it's partly because of this. And Whitney, we all owe you so much.
Well, thank you.
I'm so grateful to you. I really have so much respect for you. By the way, Whitney is the author of now coming 5 books soon, but 4 books, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Joseph Smith, a Prophet Revealed, Hiram Smith, a Prophet Unsung, which is incredible because it helps us understand things about Hiram that we don't typically acknowledge. He was the second president of the church.
Yes.
Hiram. Not Brigham. Hiram was the second president of the church, a prophet, seer, and revelator. He was named by the Lord as the Holy Spirit of promise, which is a really, really big deal, and the patriarch to the church to give the patriarchal blessings to the saints. And Whitney's written a fabulous book. Please go find her. Where can they best find your work?
Just on Amazon. I have my first
support her in her work.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. My first book is on wisdom. It's for women to help them understand their place in God's kingdom. Then Joseph Smith Revealed. Then Hiram Smith, the Prophet Unsung. And then a lot of people have left the church over the gospel topics essays that the church has produced. And so I have my own book called Essays on Gospel Topics. It's a little twist on theirs. And it covers things from, it's a lot of my polygamy talks, women in the priesthood, tithing, and some other, I also talk about the world of spirits and Joseph F. Smith's vision. So it's a fun little essay book that hopefully will restore your faith after the church's essays have destroyed it.
Well, God bless you, friend.
Well, thank you.
Audience, I know that many of you are huge fans of and very grateful for Whitney's work. And those of you who are not as familiar, you're going to want to investigate what she's done. Read her books, especially Joseph Smith, A Prophet Revealed, A Faithful Telling. Joseph Smith Revealed, A Faithful Telling. Thank you. Please read her book. It has changed the lives of many, many people. I can't tell you, Whitney, the number of times people come up to me and said, I have read Whitney's book and it has changed my life. So thank you. God bless you. And and we will see you next time. We have one more presentation to do together. Yep. And I can't wait to share that with the audience. And you and I, we're going to continue to collaborate. We have lots to talk about over the next while. So Thank you, Whitney, for being here.
Thank you, Jeremy.
I'm so grateful to Whitney for joining me and for that amazing conversation. Every time I talk to Whitney, I learn something new. She has a tremendous wealth of knowledge and wisdom, insights that I've benefited from for many, many years. And I'm so grateful for her work, for her books, and for all that she has to teach me and teach us. And hopefully you felt the same. Also, hopefully now you have a better picture of Heber Kimball. I don't know if the audience may remember, I came on to Michelle Stone's podcast many years ago now, and we did an episode called The Godfathers of Mormon Polygamy. and I gave a presentation called They Knew Before. It was the first time I talked about these things, but hopefully now you have an even better picture of Heber Kimball and his role in all of this. And hopefully you'll stick with us, because as I lay out the rest of the evidence in England, that picture is going to become clearer and clearer. And I believe we just may well have a different origin story for Mormon polygamy. That's today's episode. By the way, want to thank everyone who has subscribed. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit the subscribe button. That helps us grow. It helps the algorithm. Leaving a comment really helps. Sharing this and liking the video is very, very important. And for those of you who provide financial support, $6 a month or more, from the bottom of my heart, thank you. Because we cannot do this without you. This only happens because of you. So thank you so much. And if you haven't supported the show yet and you'd like to, the links are in the description below. So please support the show. And thank you very much. That's all for today. Next time, we're going to give the second presentation that we gave at Sunstone, 6 documents, 3 that aren't used, 3 that we reinterpret, and you're going to love that conversation and what you learn from it. Thanks for stopping by.